Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? You'd never guess what kind of house holds screams no one hears, or what kind of neighbor hides a second life under a prim white curtain. The first time I heard the knock, I didn't know yet about the boy buried twice, or the woman with the stitched smile. I didn't know about the locked room in the basement where the whispers come from, even when the house is empty. But I do now, and if I tell this wrong, they might come for me again. My name is Thomas. I grew up in a quiet street in a forgettable town called Farrell. There was a gas station, a school, a hardware store that only carried one brand of everything, and the only fast food place closed at 6 p.m. Nobody locked their doors because we didn't think we needed to. That was before the Ashgrove Funeral Home reopened. It had been empty for almost 10 years. The windows were dust-streaked, and ivy had begun to crawl up the brick like nature was trying to claim it. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to throw rocks at. I used to stare at it from my bedroom window, thinking if I watched long enough I'd see a face in the upper floors. I never expected to be the face looking out. See, my dad had just died. Cancer. Quick and cruel. I was 19. Home from college because of bills and grief, and a family falling apart. My mom couldn't afford to keep the house on her own, so when the opportunity came to rent the little apartment next to the newly reopened funeral home, cheap, fully furnished, utilities included, she jumped at it. I didn't argue. I should have. The place shared a wall with the Ashgrove building. Our unit had been converted from what used to be the caretaker's residence. You could still smell formaldehyde in the air vents if you didn't keep the windows open. The man who reopened Ashgrove was Mr. Abram Dwyer. He wore a gray suit that looked pressed even in the rain, always polite, never smiled with his teeth. He had this voice, soft like. It was always telling you a secret you weren't supposed to know. Said he bought the building to honor the dead properly. Nobody asked why someone would come out to the middle of nowhere to open a funeral home. Fairhill wasn't exactly thriving. The first knock came at 2:03 a.m. We'd only lived there a week. I was awake, headphones in, watching videos with the sound off and captions on. The knock wasn't frantic. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door, the one that faced the funeral home's delivery alley. I paused the video, waited, listened. Another knock, exactly the same. 3, measured, heavy. I got up, figuring maybe someone was lost or drunk, but when I looked through the peephole, nothing. Just empty dark, no movement, no shadows, no footprints in the thin frost that had formed on the ground. I went back to bed. Told myself it was nothing. It wasn't. The next day, I noticed something odd. Dwyer had a hearse parked in the alley, but I'd never once seen it arrive. It was just there, always in the exact same spot, like it hadn't moved in days, even though I swore I'd heard an engine that night. There were drag marks in the gravel behind it, not tire marks. Long, uneven scratches in the dirt, like something had been pulled. Something heavy. And then there were the flowers. They appeared overnight, black dahlias, lilies, orchids, arranged neatly on the doorstep of the funeral home. No vases, no cards. They weren't wilted. They were fresh. Too fresh. But no one saw who left them. I asked the mailman, the neighbors. Nothing. That night, I bolted the back door. But the knock came anyway. 2:03 a.m. 3 slow knocks, this time on the window. The curtain moved slightly, just a twitch, as if fingers had brushed it. I stayed frozen, staring from across the room, watching the ripple settle like a ripple in water. The window was too high for anyone to reach without a ladder, and we didn't own a ladder. The funeral services started soon after. Small ones, always at night, no processions, no announcements, just candles in the windows, and the faint sound of an organ echoing from within. I tried asking Mr. Dwyer once how he had so many clients when nobody even knew it had reopened. He smiled, the corners of his mouth curling up like someone was pulling them with fish hooks. People always find their way here, he said. That night I heard crying through the wall. At first, I thought it was my mom. But her room was silent. The crying came from behind the bookshelf, which sat against the shared wall with the funeral home. I pressed my ear to it, a child's voice. Soft, repeating the same thing. It wasn't my time. 3 days later, I met Sarah. She worked at the diner up the street. Had a crooked smile and one of those voices that made everything she said sound like a dare. We hit it off fast. When I told her where I lived, she stopped stirring her coffee and said, "That place? You should move." I laughed. She didn't. What do you mean? You know a kid died there, right? Years ago. Got locked in one of the caskets during a service. They didn't find him until the next morning. I swallowed hard. Was it accidental? She shook her head slowly. No one knows. Casket was sealed from the outside. Funeral home closed down not long after. Never reopened. Until now, I guess. That night, I couldn't sleep. 2:03 a.m. came, and I held my breath. This time, no knock. But when I opened the fridge the next morning, there were flowers inside. Black dahlias. Perfectly arranged, no dirt on the stems. My mom hadn't put them there. She hates flowers. I started noticing things. The hallway light flickered at exactly 2:03 a.m. every night, even if it had worked perfectly all day. The neighbor's dog, normally a loud, yappy thing, would whimper and scratch at the door at that exact time, staring toward the funeral home like it saw something the rest of us didn't. One night, I recorded the wall where the crying came from. Just left my phone there and went to bed. When I listened to it the next morning, I dropped the phone. There was a voice whispering behind the sobs. A second voice, male, low, gravelly. It said, "You opened the door, Thomas. Now you keep it open." I confronted Mr. Dwyer the next day. He was polishing the handles of the hearse. "I don't know what's going on in there," I said, "but something's wrong." He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting it. Not everything dead wants to rest. Some of them knock. And when you answer, he didn't finish, just smiled and walked away. I moved the bookshelf. There was a vent behind it, an old, sealed grate, but the seal had been broken. The screws were loose. Inside was a tunnel, dusty and dark, running into the wall of the funeral home. I stuck my arm in, feeling around, until my fingers brushed something cold. A toy, a stuffed bear, missing an eye, its fur matted. Tied to it was a note, "Keep me in the dark or he'll find me again." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, because I saw something. At exactly 2:03 a.m., I looked out the window, drawn by something I can't explain. In the alley, standing under the single flickering light, was a boy. No older than 8. His skin was gray-blue, lips cracked, dressed in what looked like funeral clothes from a decade ago. He raised his hand and pointed directly at me. This was just the beginning. I hadn't found the hidden door in the basement yet, hadn't seen the room with the casket that breathes, hadn't watched someone walk into the funeral home and never come out. But I was about to, because when I told Sarah about the boy, she turned pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I saw his body." "What do you mean?" She pulled out her phone, showed me a picture. A boy, same suit, same gray, blue skin, only this time he was in a casket. Her caption read, "The one who never made it home." You ever wake up and just know you're not alone? It was 3:12 a.m. when I shot upright in bed, drenched in sweat, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The air in my room felt too still, like everything had been paused. No wind, no hum of passing cars, not even the house creaked. Just silence, except for the sound coming from the wall, a soft, slow scratching. At first, I thought it was a tree branch or a mouse inside the wall, but it wasn't random. The sound had rhythm, deliberate. 4 slow drags, Pause. 3 fast ones. Pause. And then silence again. I held my breath, waiting for it to repeat. But nothing came. I wanted to go back to sleep, chalk it up to a nightmare, or maybe my imagination running wild after the funeral home incident. But something had changed. I could feel it. Like that house. That thing across the street had reached out, touched something in me, and now it wouldn't let go. When the morning light finally broke through the curtains, I got dressed and walked next door. Not because I wanted to, but because something inside me whispered I had to. Matt was already outside, pacing. His face looked like he hadn't slept either. "You heard it too, didn't you?" he asked before I even said hello. I nodded. "Same wall?" he asked. "Same wall," I said. "The one that faces the funeral home." He looked around like he was afraid someone might be watching. "You want to see something?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He took that as a yes. We went into his house, then down into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Matt pointed to the far wall. "There. That's where I heard it from." I stepped closer. The concrete was cracked, discolored, and in one spot, a faint outline, a rectangle, about the size of a small door, covered up. "No way," I whispered. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Matt asked. "That someone sealed this from the other side." He nodded. "I thought about breaking it open, just to see. But last time I knocked on it." He trailed off. "What happened?" Matt swallowed, then lifted his hand and mimicked knocking 3 slow taps. He waited, and then, from the other side of the wall, we heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Same pattern, same speed, answering. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. "I told you," Matt said. "It's not in your head, it's real." We left the basement and agreed not to tell anyone. Not yet, but that night the scratching came again. This time it didn't stop after a few seconds. It went on for hours. And it wasn't just scratching anymore. There were whispers. Faint, garbled, like someone talking underwater. I pressed my ear to the wall and froze. It was my name. Over and over. Whispered in a voice I didn't recognize. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A second voice. Matt's voice. But he wasn't in my house. I grabbed my phone, texted him, "Are you talking to me through the wall?" He replied instantly, "No." Why? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Matt called the police. I begged him not to, but he said he needed answers. They came. 2 officers, one younger, cocky, the other older, quieter. We brought them to the basement, showed them the wall. The older one stared at it too long, his face tightened. This house used to be owned by the same guy who ran the funeral home. "So what?" Matt asked. "So," the officer said, "maybe you don't want to dig too deep. Some things stay buried for a reason." The younger one scoffed. "Probably just pipes or rats." "Rats don't whisper names," I said. They didn't listen. But the older cop pulled me aside before they left. Said something I haven't been able to stop thinking about. "You ever hear of Harold Finch?" I shook my head. He ran the place? Died in that basement. Alone. Locked in. They found him weeks later. Hands shredded from trying to claw his way out. I asked how that was possible. "He was buried alive," the cop said. "Be mistake. Or maybe not." He left without another word. That night, the scratching got worse. Now it was coming from inside the room. And I swear, just before I turned on the light, I saw a shadow in the corner. Not my shadow. Someone else's. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. The low thud behind my bedroom wall stayed quiet after the last knock. I lay there, eyes wide open, waiting for another sound. Anything to tell me I'd imagined it. But the silence was worse. Silence meant it was waiting, planning, listening. By sunrise, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and made for the funeral home. I'd have to sneak back in, alone this time. Whatever was in that house, whatever was behind that wall, I needed to see it with my own eyes. and the more I waited, the more I risked losing my mind. The morning fog had clung to the street like something alive. The house loomed on the corner, a black scar against the sky. It looked darker than usual, if that was even possible, like it drank in the light around it. I crossed the yard slowly, heart hammering, and slipped in through the back door. It creaked like it knew I was coming. Inside, everything felt colder than before. No wind, no draft. Just cold. The funeral home hadn't seen business in months, maybe longer. Even the neighborhood avoided looking at it. I made my way to the embalming room, where Michael and I had found the blueprints. The floorboards groaned under each step. Dust filled the air like ash. The wall was still there, still solid, still wrong. I tapped it again. This time the sound was clearer, hollow. I knew what had to be done. I hurried back home, grabbing a crowbar and a sledgehammer from the garage. If Michael had been with me, he might have tried to talk me out of it. But he hadn't answered my calls since the night before. Either he was avoiding me, or something had already gotten to him. Back in the funeral home, I hesitated just a moment. Standing before the wall, I thought of all the ghost stories I'd heard. All the movies where someone pried open something that should have stayed shut. But this wasn't fiction. This was happening, and I was already too deep. The first strike was loud, deafening. Plaster cracked. Paint peeled. My hands vibrated with the force of it. The second blow split the surface. The wall groaned like something wounded. By the fifth strike, I saw it. Behind the ruined boards and plaster, a wooden door. A door that shouldn't have been there. A door that wasn't in the blueprints. It was blackened with age, with a handle that looked forged rather than manufactured. The wood pulsed faintly under my flashlight beam. Something about it felt off. Not just old. Wrong. I reached for the handle, cold, almost frozen. And then I heard it again. The whisper. This time it wasn't coming from the wall. It came from behind the door. I leaned in, words. Garbled, wet, like someone speaking through a mouthful of soil. Don't open it. I froze. My breath caught. The voice was mine. I stepped back, almost dropping the flashlight. Don't open it? The voice repeated. My voice, but thinner, rasping, like a version of me I'd never want to meet. I should have turned around. I should have run. But curiosity is a curse, and mine had already gotten the better of me. I opened the door. Inside, darkness. Not just the absence of light. This was something deeper. Like it had weight. The flashlight flickered. One step, then two. The air changed. It didn't smell like dust or rot or mildew. It smelled like turned earth. Like a grave. I stepped fully inside. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, slamming my fists against the wood. It didn't budge. The handle was gone. Panic surged through me. But before I could even scream, the darkness lit up, softly, red. A glow from the far end of the space. It illuminated the room in slow pulses, like a heartbeat. I turned to face it. A hallway stretched out before me, far longer than the depth of the building should allow. The red glow came from old lanterns mounted on the walls, flickering with flames that never should have burned in air so cold. And lining the hallway, on either side, doors. So many doors. Each one bore a name. Faded, carved in a script I didn't recognize. Some of the doors were splintered. Others were fresh, like they'd just been sealed. Then I saw it, the last door. It had my name on it. I took a step back, heart beating so loud it echoed in my ears. A sudden whisper swept through the corridor. Voices stacked on voices, words I couldn't place, blotter. Sobs, screams. I ran. I don't remember how long. I just ran. I don't remember reaching the door I'd come through. I don't remember it opening. But I woke up in my bed, fully clothed, boots still on, mud tracked across my floor. I checked my phone. No missed calls. Still no word from Michael. I thought it was a dream, a hallucination, until I looked at my wall. The wallpaper had peeled back where the hidden door had been. Not in the funeral home, in my house. and scratched into the drywall in that same warped script, "We're not finished." The days that followed blurred. I barely ate, barely slept. Every night I heard knocks, not just from the funeral home, but under my floor, behind the ceiling, inside the pipes. I called Michael again. Finally, he answered. "You opened it, didn't you?" His voice was flat, hollow. "You saw the hallway," he said. "With the doors." "Yes," I whispered. "One had my name." "Mine too," he said. "They don't just show it to anyone." He hung up. The next morning, he was gone. I went to his house. Empty. Doors unlocked. Lights on. His living room wall had the same phrase scratched into it, "We're not finished." I knew then. This wasn't over. The door hadn't just led somewhere. It had let something out. And now it wanted me back. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of the trees, sounded amplified, menacing. I kept seeing that figure in the red, lit window over and over again in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And things were about to get worse. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee I barely sipped. My mom was humming to herself, packing her lunch, seemingly oblivious to the nightmare I'd endured. I thought about telling her. I thought about telling anyone. But how do you explain that you saw something in a funeral home window that no one was supposed to be in? So I kept quiet. After school that day, I stayed behind to talk to Mr. Crawley, the janitor. He was one of the oldest staff members, and people said he'd been around since the school opened. "You ever hear anything strange about the old Granger funeral home?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up from the mop bucket, pausing. "What makes you ask that?" I shrugged. "I live next door. Just wondering." He studied me for a second, then leaned on his mop. "They used to say the old man Granger lost his mind before he died. Started holding services for people who weren't actually dead. Town tried to shut it down more than once." I blinked. "What do you mean weren't dead?" He nodded slowly. "You heard me. There were stories. Back in the 70s. Someone swore they saw a body sit up in the viewing room. Sheriff wrote it off as hallucination, grief. But more than one person said it. That cold feeling crept back in. And the red light?" I asked. He went still. "Don't go near that place at night, son. That's all I'll say." He turned back to his mop. That night, the sky was overcast, the moon reduced to a dim smear behind the clouds. I couldn't resist. Curiosity gnawed at me like a rat trapped under my skin. I had to see what was inside. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my hoodie, and slipped out through the back door. I crept along the side of the house, my breath visible in the cold air. The grass was wet with dew, and each step felt louder than it should. The back door of the funeral home was surprisingly easy to open. Inside, the air was thick and musty. The smell of decaying flowers, like those left too long in a vase, lingered. I moved carefully, avoiding the creaky spots in the floor I remembered from the years it was still active. The halls were lined with outdated wallpaper, peeling in some places. A few of the doors were slightly open, revealing dusty rooms with covered furniture. And then I saw it, the viewing room. The door was cracked open. A faint glow pulsed inside. I pushed it gently. The room looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust lay thick across the rows of pews, and the pulpit at the front was draped in a moth-eaten velvet curtain. But what stopped me cold was the coffin. It was open and empty. A single red bulb dangled from the ceiling directly above it, swaying ever so slightly, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I couldn't move. My eyes locked on that empty box like it would close shut on its own. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from the hallway. I turned off the flashlight and dropped to the ground, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Thud, scrape, thud. Something was moving just outside the room, slowly, methodically. and then a voice. "You're not supposed to be here." It wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. It was calm, like someone stating a fact. I dared to peek through the crack between the door and the wall. A figure in a dark suit, tall and thin, was walking past the room, dragging something behind him. It looked like a gurney. I stayed frozen, not breathing. He stopped right outside the door. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening. And then, without turning, he moved on. When I finally found the courage to move, I slipped out the door, moving as quietly as I could. I didn't dare use my flashlight again. I used memory and instinct to retrace my steps back to the rear exit. I was almost there when I passed a room I hadn't noticed before. The door was shut, but from under it, a faint white, blue glow leaked through. And whispering. So many voices, they weren't speaking clearly. It was a jumble, like a dozen people talking at once, none of it making sense. I ran. Back in my room, I locked the window and curled up under the blanket, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me. That night, I dreamed of the viewing room again. But this time, there was a nameplate on the coffin. My name. The next morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the side of the house. They were long and narrow, and there was something wrong about them. Like whoever made them walked with a limp, or had one foot that dragged. I wiped them up before my mom could see. At school, I didn't pay attention. I couldn't focus. Every time someone said my name, I jumped. Every time someone walked behind me, I flinched. I needed answers. After school, I skipped the bus and walked to the town's library. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered they had a microfilm archive of old newspapers. The librarian was a quiet man with thick glasses and a cough that never seemed to go away. "Granger Funeral Home?" I said. "Anything from the 1970s. He gave me a look, but didn't ask questions. He led me to the back, showed me how to work the machine, and left me alone. I scrolled through years of headlines. Burglaries, bake sales, city council meetings, and then in an issue from 1973, Local Funeral Home UNDR INV several witnesses have come forward claiming they saw movements from within caskets during viewings at Granger Funeral Home. The funeral director, Charles Granger, dismissed the claims as grief-induced hallucinations. One witness, however, insists she heard breathing from inside the coffin during her sister's service. There was a photo. The man in the photo was the same one I saw last night. Charles Granger. But he should have been long dead. The article mentioned the investigation was dropped due to lack of evidence, and the funeral home quietly shut down the next year. Granger was said to have moved away. No forwarding address. No obituary. He just disappeared. Except he didn't. Because I'd seen him. I left the library as the sun dipped low behind the clouds. The streetlights buzzed to life. I knew I should go home. I knew I should stay inside. But something had changed. I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was angry. Whatever was happening in that funeral home, it wasn't done. And I had a feeling it wasn't just me it would come for. That night, I made a plan. I would go back inside. But this time, I wouldn't go alone. I called my friend Wyatt. He owed me a favor. "You remember the Granger place?" I asked. He laughed. "The haunted house." "Yeah, what about it?" "I need your help." Tonight, there was a long pause. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Another pause. "All right, I'm in." I hung up, looked out my window, and saw the red light flicker back on. Something was waiting. And it knew I was coming back. I couldn't sleep. Even with my bedroom door locked and the curtains drawn, the thought of those two figures from the funeral home's upper floor loomed in the back of my mind. Their unmoving silhouettes, rigid and deliberate, had burrowed into my memory. Were they real people, wax figures, ghosts? I didn't know. But they had been watching me. That much I was sure of. The next morning, I woke up with the sheets tangled around my ankles and a faint headache thudding behind my eyes. My mouth was dry, and my limbs felt heavy. I checked my phone. It was 11:43 am, nearly noon. I had overslept by hours. That wasn't like me. Especially not now, when I was on high alert. There was an odd smell wafting from the hallway, like old perfume and stale cigarettes. I sat up slowly and tiptoed toward the door, pressing my ear to the wood. Silence. I opened it. Nothing. The hallway was empty, still dim from the blackout curtains I had put up, but the smell remained. Stronger now. I followed it. It led toward the attic door. Now, the attic in this house had never opened, not once in the 2 months since I moved in. There was no keyhole, no handle, and no ladder. Just a panel in the ceiling with water, stained edges, and a fine line of cobwebs around it. I had always assumed it was just sealed off, forgotten, but now it was open. A narrow staircase extended downward from the panel. Not a ladder, a staircase. Wooden, old, the kind you'd see in a centuries-old farmhouse. It ended halfway down the hallway, touching the floor like it had always been there. I stared. I backed up slowly into my bedroom, slammed the door, and called my landlord. "Hey, it's Adrian. Sorry to bother you, but there's a staircase in my hallway now, from the attic. Did someone come by while I was asleep or something?" A pause. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "The attic. There's a staircase now. It wasn't there yesterday." Another pause. "Then, there is no attic. Not a real one anyway. That's just a sealed panel from the renovation. The house doesn't have that kind of storage. You sure you're not dreaming?" Dreaming? No. But hallucinating? I was starting to wonder. I hung up. I crept back into the hallway and stared up again. The staircase was still there. Still as real as anything else in the house. I took a picture. But when I looked at it on my phone, the frame showed nothing. Just the blank ceiling. No opening. No steps. That smell, the floral rot, was thick now. It crawled across my skin like a warning, but curiosity had a grip on me. I climbed the stairs. They groaned under my weight, but held. The higher I went, the colder it became. By the time I reached the top, I could see a faint glow seeping out of the space above. Not warm light, blue, like moonlight filtered through water. Then, I saw it. It was not an attic. Not really, it was a room, a small, square chamber with walls covered in deep, velvet wallpaper. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, blackened by time. There was furniture, covered in plastic sheets, and a mirror taller than any I had ever seen, facing the far wall. But here was the thing that stopped my breath. There was no door. Not back to the staircase. Not on any side. I turned around and the stairs were gone. I was trapped. My breath started to race. I clawed at the walls. Nothing. The velvet paper felt almost wet under my fingers, like damp skin. The mirror caught my eye. Its surface rippled as though breathing, and I took a step toward it. Then it changed. My reflection was gone. In its place stood a room nearly identical to the one I was in, but not quite. The furniture in that room wasn't covered. It was worn, dust-covered. There was no chandelier, just a single flickering bulb hanging from a wire. And sitting in a chair in the center of the room was a woman. She wore a black veil. I stepped closer. The woman in the reflection looked up at me. Her face was hidden under the sheer fabric, but her mouth was visible. It twisted into a smile that showed teeth too sharp, too white. She reached up, slowly, and pulled back her veil. It was me, but not me. Her skin was grayish and taut, her eyes milky and unfocused. A long cut stretched across her throat, stitched up with crude black thread. My heart pounded. I turned away from the mirror, and the door was back. Not a staircase. A door. I didn't think. I just ran through it. I was back in my hallway. On the floor. The attic panel sealed above me. The smell was gone, but something had changed. When I stood up and turned around, I noticed a picture frame on the wall that hadn't been there before. I leaned in. It was an old photo, sepia tone, cracked glass, of the funeral home. A group of people stood in front of it, dressed in early 1900s clothing. Men in suits, women in long dresses, and right at the edge of the photo was me, my exact face, same haircut, same eyes. I staggered back. The photo fell off the wall and shattered. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the funeral home. The window on the upper floor lit up again, faintly, and once more I saw the two figures. But now, there was a third. One in the middle, wearing my face. The morning after the incident with the body in the driveway, I tried to convince myself that exhaustion was the culprit. Sleep, deprivation, hallucinations, stress, induced paranoia, whatever rational excuse I could find to file the previous night under bad dreams, I clung to it like a life raft. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't a dream. The whispers had started around 3:00 a.m. the previous night. I thought I was just hearing the wind rustle through the trees, but the sound had a rhythm to it, like breathing, or worse, murmured voices. Then came the knock on my wall, one knock, then another. Then a slow, deliberate dragging sound as if something, or someone, was moving just behind the drywall. By morning, the world seemed normal again. Birds chirped. A mail truck rattled down the street. Children laughed at the bus stop like nothing had ever happened. But I couldn't unsee what I saw, or unhear what I heard. I kept to myself that day, not even bothering to step outside. I tried to work from home, but my mind wandered back to the funeral home next door. I watched it from my bedroom window for hours, half expecting that strange woman with the dead eyes to emerge again. But she never did. Instead, something worse happened. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Did you see it too? I stared at the screen, heart pounding. There was no name, no number, just the message. I didn't respond. A minute later, another messaging. They don't like to be watched. I dropped my phone. My hand trembled as I picked it up again and blocked the number. It didn't help. Another message came through, this time from a different number. You live too close. That wall won't protect you forever. I slammed my phone onto the desk and backed away. What wall? Was someone watching me? I shut the blinds and turned on every light in the house. My skin crawled with the feeling that I was being observed from just beyond sight. The wall between my home and the funeral home had always been thick, red brick and concrete. But now it felt paper, thin. I could hear breathing. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall that separated my living room from their embalming room. At least, that's where I imagined it was. I'd never been inside the funeral home. Not even during the open house when the new owners moved in. They didn't hold community tours, and no one ever seemed to go in or out. Yet somehow, it was always busy. The parking lot never stayed empty for long, but I never saw a single hearse. I began to hear faint tapping again, so faint it could have been mistaken for the creaking of an old house settling. But this house was only 8 years old. It shouldn't creak like that. I moved closer to the wall and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I was about to pull away when a scrape echoed right through the drywall, as if fingernails were dragging across the other side. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. You're not supposed to be here. I stumbled back, gasping. I called the police. I didn't know what I expected them to do. Maybe search the funeral home, maybe tell me I was just having a breakdown. But when the officer arrived, he didn't even bother stepping inside my house. This isn't the first complaint we've had, he said while glancing toward the funeral home. Nothing ever sticks, though. They've got permits, licenses, everything. The place is spotless on paper. But they're not. If you're hearing things, it might be something in your walls. Squirrels, maybe. Happens more than you'd think. He didn't believe a word I said. After he left, I didn't feel safer. I felt exposed. It was like reporting the whispers had awakened something worse, something angry. That night, the walls whispered again. But this time, I recognized a voice. It was my mother's. She's been dead for 6 years. Come closer, the voice said. It's safe in here. They lied to you. I'm waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then came the sound of something scraping against the inside of the wall. Again and again, like nails trying to claw their way through. It wasn't random. It was measured. Intentional. Then a final tap, 5 knocks in a row. Tap, 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 tap. The knocking became a pattern, repeating every minute or so. I recorded it. I had to. Maybe proof would help someone believe me. The next day, I played the recording back, but there was nothing. Just silence. I thought I was going insane, until I spoke with Heather. Heather lived on the opposite side of the funeral home. We rarely spoke beyond polite greetings. But that morning, I found her sitting on her porch steps, pale and shaking, with tear tracks down her cheeks. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded. "I heard my brother last night. He died when I was 16. I heard him calling me from inside the wall." We stared at each other, sharing the silence of shared horror. Finally, she whispered, "They're not dead in there. They're trapped." A car horn startled us both. A sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway of the funeral home. The rear door opened, and out stepped the same pale woman I saw the night before. Her hair was slicked back, and she wore a long coat despite the rising summer heat. She looked straight at us. No expression, no blink, just staring. Heather scrambled back inside, slamming her door shut. I stayed frozen, too afraid to move. The woman tilted her head slightly, and her lips parted just enough to reveal something chilling. There were no teeth, just black gums and a grin that didn't belong on a living person. Then, she walked inside the funeral home and shut the door behind her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I placed a camera in my living room, aimed at the wall. And for the first few hours, nothing happened. But at 2056 a.m., the video showed something impossible. The wall shifted, like it breathed. The plaster bowed outward, then snapped back into place. Then something pressed against it from the other side. A handprint, small, child-sized. Then another. Then a face. I paused the video and stared. It was the boy from the funeral home driveway. The one who shouldn't have been there. His eyes stared into the room, blank and lifeless. His mouth opened, and I could swear he was screaming. But the video had no sound. Just silence. I watched the wall for hours after that. I don't know what I expected, but around 4:20 a.m., the wall went back to normal. The face faded. The pressure disappeared. The house was silent, but I wasn't. I screamed. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the camera was gone, vanished, like it had never existed. The only thing left was the handprint, on the inside of the wall, and beneath it, written in smeared dust, a single word, Rowan. The message stayed burned in my mind, "Are you in?" For hours I sat in my room, lights on, phone clutched in my hand like it could ward off whatever watched me from the shadows. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, maybe some twisted game. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was a joke. The house next door had its own heartbeat. I could hear it pulsing low in the walls. Just past 2 a.m. a knock came at my window. I froze. It wasn't loud. More like a soft tap, just enough to drag your attention away from everything else. My room was on the second floor. I pulled back the curtain, heart pounding. Nothing. No one. Just the dark backyard and the silhouette of the funeral home, looming against the sky like a sleeping giant. But something had changed. There was a light on. In the basement. I hadn't even known the funeral home had a basement until that moment. But through the slits of the cellar doors that jutted out of the earth near the back entrance, I saw it. Flickering orange light, like candle flames caught in a gust of wind. I should have turned away. Should have closed the curtain, crawled into bed, and pretended none of it existed. Instead, I went outside. Every step across the lawn was a mistake I couldn't take back. My sneakers were damp from the dew. The air felt heavy, like I was walking underwater. I kept glancing at the windows of the funeral home expecting someone, or something, to be watching. No one was, until I reached the cellar. The doors were wooden, thick and weathered, paint peeling back in long scabs. One was slightly ajar, just wide enough for me to grip the iron handle and ease it open. The stairs yawned before me, steep and cracked. Flickering candlelight danced along the stone walls. It smelled like dirt and mildew, and something else. Something sweet and rotting. I stepped down. Each step groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. The air grew colder, thicker. My breath started fogging and the smell got worse. I covered my nose, gagged, kept going. At the base of the stairs was a room I can only describe as wrong. The walls were stone, lined with wooden shelves that sagged under the weight of jars. Hundreds of them. Jars filled with dark fluid, chunks of things that looked vaguely human. Teeth, fingers, globs of hair. Some of the jars had names scratched into their glass. Names I recognized. Mrs. Donnelly, the librarian who'd vanished last spring. Kurt Hollis, the mailman who disappeared in '98. A dozen more. I backed away, bile burning my throat. Then I saw the table. It was in the middle of the room, a steel autopsy slab stained dark. Someone, or something, had carved symbols into the concrete floor beneath it. They writhed when I looked at them too long, like snakes under skin. A sound broke through the silence. Breathing. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my phone's flashlight trembling in my grip. A man stood in the far corner. No, not a man. He was too tall, too thin, limbs too long like someone had stretched him on a rack. His face was blurred. I don't mean hidden. I mean it blurred, like it refused to stay still in my vision. One second he had eyes, the next he didn't. A mouth that opened, and then vanished. But I could hear him breathing, slow, wet. I stepped back. He stepped forward. Something in me snapped. I turned and bolted up the stairs, not caring if I fell and broke my neck. The candlelight chased me, dancing higher like flames licking my back. I slammed the cellar door shut, nearly catching my foot. Only when I reached my front porch did I realize I was crying. That's when I saw it, on my own door, scratched into the wood with something sharp. You looked? I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The next morning, I called the police. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't tell them everything. Just that I'd seen lights on in the abandoned building. That someone might be squatting there. 2 officers showed up that afternoon. I watched from the porch as they knocked, waited, then forced the door open. They stayed inside for about 20 minutes. When they came back out, they were laughing. Just dust and mold. One of them said, "No one's lived there in years. You sure you saw something?" I didn't answer. Because I could see it in their eyes. They didn't go into the basement. I don't think they even saw the door. That night, I tried to call my dad again. No answer. Tried my aunt. Nothing. So I did the only thing I could. I walked back to the cellar. In daylight, everything looked normal. The doors were shut tight, chained. I yanked on them, tried to prove to myself it had happened, that I wasn't losing my mind. But they wouldn't budge, not even an inch, and when I finally gave up and turned around, there was a new jar on my porch. Not hidden, just sitting there in plain sight. Inside it, a single eye, floating. The label scratched into the glass. Lucas. My name. I don't remember sprinting home. All I remember is the door slamming shut behind me, my body crumpling to the floor, and my lungs refusing to fill with air. The scream, the one I heard in the funeral home's basement. It wasn't human. It started like a person in pain, but then it shifted. Drawn out and twisted, like something mocking a scream rather than truly feeling it. It had echoed through the vents of the place, rolling through the walls like a vibration rather than a noise. After an hour huddled under a blanket, I did what every stupid character in a horror movie does. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a sound from the furnace. Maybe it was the pipes. Old houses groan, right? especially ones built to hold the dead. But then came the scratching. That night, I stayed up, unable to sleep. The air felt different, thick, like it was trying to push me down. Around 30:17 a.m., I heard something. Scratching. From beneath the floorboards in my room. It was faint at first. Gentle. Like something brushing the underside of the floor. Then louder. A deliberate clawing motion. Like nails being dragged slowly against wood. I leaned over the bed, pressing my ear to the floor. The sound stopped. I lay back down. And then it started again. Faster this time. I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and crept out into the hallway. The scratching followed me. It moved beneath the floor, tracking me. When I stepped into the kitchen, it stopped. Complete silence. Until the knock. 3 slow knocks echoed through the house. Not at the front door. From beneath the floor. I bolted back to my room and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I ripped up part of the carpet and tried to pry up a floorboard near where the sound had come from. It wouldn't budge. Like the nails holding it had been fused with the wood, and then the smell returned. That cloying sweetness mixed with rot, the one from the funeral home basement. It flooded my room like a slow leak from something festering. I opened every window, sprayed every inch with air freshener, but it didn't matter. The smell wasn't in the air. It was in the wood, in the walls, in the nails. It was in me. The funeral home wasn't done with me. I decided to go back. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't live with the unknown clawing at my sanity. I had to know what was under there. It was late afternoon when I slipped into the funeral home again. I told myself I'd go to the basement, take pictures, document anything I could. That way, I could show someone, maybe even the police. But when I arrived, the door to the basement was gone. No sign of it, just a wall, solid, painted drywall, like it had never been there. My heart sank. Was I losing it? Was I hallucinating? Then I heard it, soft crying. A woman, coming from inside the walls. I pressed my ear to the spot where the basement door had once been. The crying turned into gasps, then whispers. He watches from the dark. He listens through the wood. He waits. I stumbled back. My vision blurred. And then something behind me creaked. I spun around. The embalming room door was wide open. I hadn't touched it. Inside, the air was colder than outside. A slab table sat in the center, rusted tools lined up neatly. A single light flickered above. It buzzed like it was straining to stay alive. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. I screamed and lunged for it, twisting the handle. It wouldn't move. Then the lights cut out, pitch black. All I had was the faint glow of my phone. I turned on the flashlight and scanned the room. Nothing. But then I saw the slab table wasn't empty. A body bag lay there, unzipped halfway. It was open just enough to show a mouth, a gaping smile. Lips split far too wide, stretched like they'd been cut at the edges. And then, the mouth moved, whispered, "Lucas." I dropped my phone. The flashlight rolled across the floor. Shadows shifted, changing shape, when I picked it up again. The body bag was zipped shut. I kicked at the door until it finally gave way, spilling me into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for air. I tried to tell people, my mom, my friend Charlie, even a local journalist. Nobody listened, until I found the obituary. It was in the library archives. The funeral home had once belonged to the Dalton family. In 1963, the youngest son, Henry Dalton, had gone missing in the funeral home. His body was never found. It was said he had wandered into the basement one night and vanished. 2 weeks later, the father, Emmett Dalton, hung himself in the embalming room. The funeral home had closed 3 days later, and then it sat, empty, watching, breathing, until I moved in next door. That night, I dreamed of the mouth again. It was wider, hungrier. It whispered from under my bed now, beneath my skin, in my breath. "He's awake now," it said. "He wants out." And I knew then, I hadn't imagined anything. I had opened a door that had been sealed for decades. and whatever was underneath my floorboards wasn't content staying buried anymore. I didn't sleep the night I saw the man in the mirror. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, his face would flicker back like a broken reel of film, his sunken cheeks, that grin, the emptiness behind his eyes. By morning, my whole body trembled, strung tight with adrenaline, and I kept staring at the mirror over the sink, daring it to do something again. But it didn't. Not once. And that made it worse. The funeral home next door had become more than just a curiosity. It was starting to feel like a living, breathing entity. Something about it was changing, or waking up. That morning, I left my apartment without brushing my teeth or even changing clothes. I needed answers. I didn't go to the funeral home yet. I went to the records office downtown. It took some smooth talking, but I managed to get my hands on property documents and business licenses. Cloverdale Funeral Services was originally called Hastings & Sons, established in 1911. It had operated under 4 different names over the last century, and every ownership change coincided with a death on the premises. That wasn't speculation. It was in the paperwork. Workers, directors, 1 pastor, and once a child. No cause of death listed, just a name and a date. July 17, 1964. Same day every time, July 17th. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the brittle pages. That was my birthday. Back home, I sat on my couch, blinds shut, phone off. I was spinning. I'd expected strange. I hadn't expected personal. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps on the door. I froze. The same rhythm as the knock I'd heard from inside the walls 2 nights ago. I got up, hard hammering, and opened the door. No one was there. But on the floor was a small envelope. No stamp, no name. Just a wax seal with an old-fashioned H-dot. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single slip of yellowed paper torn at the edge. I never closed the basement door. I ran outside, crossed the driveway, and stormed up the cracked steps of the funeral home. The front door was still boarded up, but now one of the planks had been pried loose, almost surgically removed. I squeezed through the gap and stepped inside. It was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt like syrup. My shoes stuck to the floor like I was wading through something invisible. I flicked on my flashlight and made my way past the viewing room and the hallway with the family portraits. I didn't even glance at them. I went straight to the cellar door. It was open. No lock, no chain, just a yawning black mouth at the foot of the hallway. I didn't hesitate. Not this time. I clicked my flashlight and stepped onto the first stair. The basement was cold. Not just cold, wrong. The air had weight to it, like it had never been touched by sunlight. The wood groaned underfoot as I descended. The walls were lined with old shelving, each holding dusty containers, rotted cloths, tools. Then I saw the door, tucked into the back wall. Nearly hidden behind an old metal embalming table was a second door. Narrow, metal, rusted at the edges, with 4 iron bolts across it. Except all the bolts were already undone. I approached slowly, each step a scream of warning in my chest. There was something carved into the metal surface. A name, Elias Hastings, the original owner. A low hum began to buzz in my ears. I reached out and touched the handle. It was warm. I turned it. The door creaked open with a heavy groan, revealing a small chamber beyond. It looked more like a monk's cell than anything else. Stone walls, a dirt floor, a single flickering candle in a rusted holder, and in the center, a chair. Strapped to it was a mannequin. No, not a mannequin. A corpse, perfectly preserved, dressed in a suit from another century. Its face was pale, skin leathery, pulled tight over high cheekbones. But the eyes were wide open, looking right at me. I stumbled back, knocking into the embalming table, sending tools clattering across the floor. The corpse didn't move, didn't blink. But I swear to God, it smiled. I ran, up the stairs, out the door, back to my apartment. I locked everything, pulled the blinds, and crawled under my bed. I stayed there for hours. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. because in the hallway, just beyond my front door, I heard it again. Tap, 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 same rhythm, then something new. A voice, low, raspy, familiar. You looked in the mirror, now he's looking back. My mouth went dry. I didn't answer. I didn't move. But deep in my mind, I saw that room, that basement, that thing in the chair. And I realized something. That wasn't just a body, it was a prison. And something, was trying to get out. The next morning, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Dr. Malcolm Graves, paranormal investigator, fringe scientist. Not the kind of guy you'd invite to a dinner party, but exactly the kind you call when the dead start knocking. I heard about your place, he said without preamble. We need to talk. Tonight. How did you? You think mirrors are just reflections. You think a house like that just sits quietly for 100 years. Something's moving. It's spreading. Meet me at the church on Hill Street. Midnight. Bring salt. He hung up. My hands were still shaking when I put the phone down, because I hadn't told anyone what I'd seen in the mirror, or about the smile, or the name carved into the door. But he already knew, and he was right. The basement door was open, but the real question was, what had just walked out? I didn't know what to expect when I arrived at the church that night, but the eerie silence in the air was enough to make my skin crawl. Hill Street was always deserted, even in the daylight. But at midnight, it was something else entirely. The faint glow from the streetlights barely cut through the fog, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. I pulled up in front of the old church, its steeple rising sharply against the dark sky. The building looked abandoned. Faded brick, cracked windows, and the faintest outline of a stained glass window that was once vibrant with color, but had since lost its soul to time. The doors were open, as if waiting for me. I hesitated, the air thick with dread, but my feet moved before my mind could catch up. I had to know what was happening. I had to understand what was in that basement. Inside, the church was darker than I'd expected, the only light coming from candles placed in corners where the shadows seemed to pull themselves tighter. Dr. Graves stood at the far end of the church, in front of the altar, his back to me. He didn't turn when I entered. Didn't even acknowledge my presence, but I could feel his eyes on me. Cold, calculating. His presence was unnerving, like he had been expecting me long before I showed up. I took a step forward, and the floor creaked beneath my feet. It was the only sound in the room. You came? Dr. Graves finally spoke, his voice raspy and almost amused. I didn't think you would, after what happened last time. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood there, trying to understand what was going on. Dr. Graves was not your average paranormal investigator. He wasn't some ghost hunter on a reality show. This man was obsessed with death, with the things that lingered beyond the grave. His obsession had cost him everything once, but now, standing in front of me, I could tell that this wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his life. I walked up to him slowly, the flickering candles casting erratic shadows across the old pews. What is this place? I asked, finally breaking the silence. He turned to me, his eyes dark and tired. A place of worship, he said simply. But it's not the church you need to be concerned with. I frowned. Then what? Dr. Graves' lips twisted into a slight grin. That funeral home you're living next to, it's not just a place for the dead. It's a place for the trapped. I stared at him, my mind racing to catch up. Trapped. You're saying the spirits are trapped there. Not spirits, he corrected me. Not exactly. This isn't a typical haunting. This is something much worse. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. You've seen it, haven't you? He asked, his voice growing softer, colder. That thing in the basement. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Dr. Graves stepped forward, his face now illuminated by the candlelight. There was something almost frenzied in his eyes. That's not just some corpse. That's Elias Hastings. The first of many. I swallowed, my throat dry. Who is he? Elias Hastings was the man who built that funeral home. And before he died, he made a deal with something ancient, something that should never have been summoned. The words hung heavy in the air. I felt sick, like I was about to throw up, but I couldn't tear myself away from his gaze. He didn't just want to preserve the dead, Dr. Graves continued, his voice taking on a distant, almost reverent tone. He wanted to trap them, to keep them from moving on, to control them. Why? I whispered, though I already had an inkling of what he was going to say. To gain power, he answered, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't enough to bury the dead. He wanted to own them, so he began experimenting. Every time the funeral home changed hands, they added something new to the ritual, a piece of the puzzle. But over the years, it became clear that it was too much, too dangerous. I blinked, trying to process it all. So, the thing in the basement, it's some kind of what? Demon. Dr. Graves gave a short, humorless laugh. Demon. No, this isn't something so simple. What's in that basement is something far older, far more dangerous. It was never meant to be contained. He stepped closer, his breath coming faster now. And what's worse, it's starting to wake up. Elias Hastings didn't just trap the dead. He opened the door to something else. Something that was never meant to be freed. I felt a chill run down my spine. And now it's free. Dr. Graves nodded grimly. If you don't do something soon, it'll spread. Whatever this thing is, it's growing stronger. It's feeding off the energy of the souls trapped inside the funeral home. It's getting bolder. And now that you've looked into the mirror, it knows you're a part of it. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Wait, you knew about the mirror. He looked at me as if I were missing something obvious. The mirror. That's just the beginning. You're already marked. That thing knows who you are, and it's using you to get what it wants. I shook my head, trying to comprehend what he was saying. What do I do? What do you want from me? Doctor. Graves met my gaze, his eyes dark with something between fear and determination. You need to destroy the source. You need to go back to the funeral home. There's something hidden in the walls of that building, something that can stop it all. I felt a rush of nausea. What? What is it? Doctor. Graves reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. This? You need to pour this onto the altar in the basement. It will destroy everything. The curse, the spirit, the door. Why can't you do it? I asked. He hesitated before answering. Because I can't be anywhere near it. The thing in that basement, it's calling to me. It knows who I am too. I took the vial from him, my fingers trembling. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. And if I don't? I asked, dreading the answer. Doctor. Graves looked me straight in the eye. Then the thing will come for you. It will come for everyone. And it will never stop. I held the vial in my hand, the small glass bottle, now feeling like a ticking time bomb. Its weight, though light, seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, as if the very act of holding it was sealing my fate. Dr. Graves had been clear. I had to destroy whatever was buried deep inside that funeral home, or it would come for me, and everyone else. But as I stood in that desolate church, staring at the vial, I felt more lost than ever. Was I supposed to be the one to stop this? The silence in the church was suffocating. Dr. Graves, who had been so certain earlier, now stood motionless in front of me, almost as if he were waiting for me to decide whether or not I would carry out the task. The air felt thick, like the walls were closing in around me, and yet a strange sense of dread pulled at me, urging me to move. I took a deep breath, swallowing my fear. The funeral home was just a few blocks away. The very same building I had moved next door to months ago. never suspecting that I was living next to something so unnatural. The same place that had already caused so much chaos in my life, that had already ruined my nights, and now threatened my very sanity. Without a word, I turned and left the church, the door creaking behind me as I stepped back into the cold, fog-filled night. My car was parked just outside, and as I slid into the driver's seat, I couldn't help but notice how the night felt different. The darkness seemed thicker, almost palpable, as if it had a life of its own. It wrapped around me like an unseen hand, pulling me toward the one place I feared most, the funeral home. The drive was a blur. The streets were empty, the usual hum of the city stilled in the wake of something far more sinister. My mind raced with thoughts of what awaited me at that funeral home. I could feel the pull of the place, the way it beckoned me. Even though I knew that answering its call meant stepping into the lion's den. The shadows that I had grown accustomed to in my neighborhood now felt menacing, alive with a darkness that didn't belong. As I approached the funeral home, I saw its looming silhouette in the distance, an ominous shape bathed in the faint glow of the streetlights. The building stood there like a sentry, dark windows staring blankly into the night. It seemed so quiet, too quiet. I parked my car in front, the engine's idle hum the only sound in the stillness. The funeral home was eerily silent, and the streetlights around it flickered, as though they too feared what was hidden inside. The door was ajar, just as Dr. Graves had said it would be. The darkness beyond it seemed to swallow the light, pulling me in. I didn't want to go inside, but I knew I had no choice. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment I would either walk away, leaving the terror to continue, or face it head on. I stepped out of the car and with shaky hands pushed open the door. The inside was as cold as ever, a deep chill that cut straight through my clothes, freezing me to the bone. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the flickering bulbs above. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I made my way down the hall, my footsteps echoing off the stone floor, louder than they should have been. With each step, the sense of dread grew stronger, like the walls were closing in around me. The door to the basement was just ahead, its rusted handle a constant reminder of the darkness below. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling as I grasped it. For a moment, I hesitated, the vial of liquid still clutched tightly in my hand. What was I really going to find down there? What if Dr. Graves was wrong? What if this was all a mistake? But I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I pulled open the door, and the darkness below seemed to swallow me whole. The stairs creaked underfoot as I descended, each step more uncertain than the last. The deeper I went, the colder it became, until I felt like I was walking into the very bowels of the earth. The air grew thick with the smell of decay, the scent of something long dead and forgotten. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I was met with the same oppressive silence. The basement was a large, open space, its stone walls lined with shelves full of dusty, forgotten objects. But in the center of the room was the altar. It was made of dark stone, its surface worn smooth by years of use. The faintest trace of something, perhaps a symbol, perhaps blood, was etched into the surface, though I couldn't make it out in the dim light. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, where the shadows were thickest, something shifted. A dark shape moved in the darkness, its edges indistinct but unmistakable. I froze, the vial still clutched in my hand. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadows seemed to grow, twisting and reaching toward me, like something was trying to emerge from the darkness. Then, slowly, I saw it, the thing in the basement. It wasn't human, not anymore. It was something else. Its body was hunched and twisted, its skin a sickly gray, stretched tight over bones that seemed to move unnaturally. It had the face of a man, Elias Hastings. No doubt. But the eyes were nothing but hollow pits of darkness, like they had been devoured by the very thing it had summoned. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice rasped, though its lips didn't move. "But now that you have." The words hung in the air like a curse. I could feel the pressure in the room, the weight of something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. I raised the vial, my hand shaking as I stepped closer to the altar. The creature in the corner seemed to recoil, its form flickering like a shadow, but it didn't move to stop me, and in that moment, I understood. Dr. Graves had been right. The only way to stop it was to destroy it completely, to sever the connection that had been made. I uncorked the vial and poured the liquid onto the altar. The moment the liquid hit the stone, a violent tremor shook the room. The walls groaned and cracked, as though the very foundation of the building was coming apart. The air grew thick with an unbearable heat, and the creature screamed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. It tried to move toward me, but it was too late. The altar erupted in a blinding light, and the creature let out a final, earth-shattering scream before it collapsed into the darkness. The light from the altar flooded the room, and I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes. When I looked again, the basement was silent, empty. The thing in the corner was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a dream, that maybe I had been hallucinating, overcome by fear and exhaustion. But the reality was unmistakable. I had done it. I had destroyed whatever had been haunting this place, whatever had been keeping the dead from resting. But even as the weight of what I had done settled on my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't destroyed everything. That somehow, somewhere, there was more to this story than I understood. Because if this building had taught me anything, it was that evil doesn't always die so easily. As I made my way back up the stairs and into the cold night air, I couldn't help but wonder. Had I really stopped it? Or had I merely postponed it? The funeral home was silent once again, but that silence felt different. It felt unfinished. The morning after the night in the basement felt like a lifetime had passed. I woke up in my own bed, drenched in sweat, with the lingering taste of fear in my mouth. The memories of the basement, the altar, and the twisted creature still clung to my mind like a nightmare that refused to let go. I hadn't been able to sleep after I had left the funeral home, and when I finally did drift into unconsciousness, my dreams were filled with shadows, whispers, and the constant sense that I had only scratched the surface of something much darker. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was late afternoon. Too late to sleep through the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to stay hidden from whatever had been unleashed. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in on me as I processed everything that had happened. The streets outside were unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that made me feel as if something was watching me from the shadows. I tried to push the feeling down, but it was impossible. It was like the night had seeped into the very air I breathed. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to know the truth. The funeral home still stood across the street from me, looming as though it were waiting for my return. The thought of stepping back into that place sent a chill through my bones, but the need to understand what had truly happened, what had been set in motion, was stronger than the fear. I needed closure. I needed to know that I had truly ended it, even though part of me wasn't so sure. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment, walking quickly toward the funeral home, determined to face whatever remained. As I neared the door, I could already feel that strange pull, as if something was calling me to return. The door creaked as I pushed it open, but this time the air inside felt different. It was colder, the silence even more oppressive than before. I hesitated, taking a moment to listen. There were no noises, no eerie whispers, no sounds of movement. Just the deep, unsettling quiet that seemed to breathe with the building. But something had changed. There was an emptiness now, something missing, something I couldn't quite place. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The funeral home was unchanged in appearance, but the energy felt off, like it had been altered in some way. I made my way through the familiar halls, moving toward the basement stairs. The walls, which had once seemed to pulse with life, albeit in a sinister way, now felt almost dead. No shadows reached toward me, no whispers filled the air. When I reached the basement door, I paused, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The door was just as it had been the night before, ajar, waiting for me to push through. This time, however, I was no longer afraid of the darkness beyond. I had already confronted it. I had faced it head on and emerged on the other side. But was it really over? I opened the door and descended the stairs. The basement was empty. No altar, no shadows, no twisted creature. It was just an abandoned room, its stone walls cold and lifeless. The faint smell of mildew and decay hung in the air, but that was the only sign of life, or rather, death, that remained. I reached the spot where the altar had been, but it was nothing more than cracked stone now. The markings were gone. The floor was barren. It was as if the entire room had been erased, scrubbed clean of its history. But then, I noticed something on the floor, a small, faintly glowing object that seemed to pulse with a soft light. I bent down and reached for it, my fingers trembling. As soon as I touched it, the glow intensified, and the air around me seemed to shift. I held in my hand what looked like a fragment of the very altar itself. It was a shard of stone, jagged and broken. Yet it seemed to hum with a strange energy. The markings that had once been etched into the altar were faintly visible on this shard, though they seemed to flicker and change every time I looked at them. As I stood there, staring at the fragment, I felt it again, the pull, the undeniable sense that I was being watched. But this time, it wasn't just from the funeral home. It was from within me. A dark presence, one that had been lying dormant, waiting for me to uncover it. The shard pulsed again, and I heard a whisper in my mind, soft and faint, but unmistakable. You thought you destroyed it, but you only freed it. The words sent a jolt of panic through me, and I quickly shoved the shard into my pocket. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I knew that the horror I had tried to bury hadn't been vanquished. It had merely been released. I rushed up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped back into the quiet funeral home, I noticed the air had grown heavier, more oppressive. I glanced around the room, feeling the creeping sensation of someone, watching me. My footsteps echoed in the vast silence, but the emptiness seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. And then, just as I reached the door to leave, I saw it. A shadow flickered in the corner of my vision, too quick to follow. But I knew it had been waiting for me. Something had been awakened. Something that couldn't be stopped by simply destroying a few objects or breaking an altar. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stumbled out of the funeral home, gasping for air, and slammed the door behind me. The cold night air hit my face, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. The funeral home loomed behind me like a dark specter, and I could already feel its influence stretching out, reaching for me. I glanced around, desperate for any kind of sign that I wasn't alone in this. But the streets were empty, the silence almost suffocating. Whatever I had unleashed was still out there, and it would find me. The streets outside felt like they were closing in on me, the stillness suffocating, every shadow now a potential threat. I had to get away from the funeral home, from the shard, from the nightmare that seemed to have followed me back into the world. Yet, the weight of the stone fragment in my pocket, a fragment that pulsed and hummed like a heartbeat, made it impossible to escape the feeling that I was tethered to something far beyond my understanding. I stumbled down the street, my feet carrying me forward, with no particular destination in mind, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a windstorm. The whispering voice from the basement still lingered in my mind. You thought you destroyed it, but you only freed it. The words echoed in the back of my skull, relentless and haunting. I couldn't understand what I had done wrong. I thought I had ended it. I had confronted the evil beneath the funeral home and destroyed its altar, its symbols, the very heart of whatever dark ritual had been taking place. But now, I knew in the deepest part of me, that my actions hadn't killed it. They had only unleashed it. The shard burned against my side, an ever-present reminder that the horror had never truly gone away. As I walked, I realized how quiet everything was. The city, usually a cacophony of noise, cars honking, people talking, distant laughter, was now eerily silent. There was no sound except for the hurried shuffle of my own footsteps. I glanced around nervously, expecting to see someone, anyone, watching me. But the streets were empty. The lights above flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The silence was thick enough to feel suffocating, as if the world was holding its breath. I needed help. I needed answers. Without thinking, I turned down a side street and headed for the one place I knew I could find some sort of refuge: the library. The library was an old, imposing building that had stood at the corner of 6th and Willow for as long as I could remember. It had been the same since my childhood, dusty shelves lined with yellowing pages, the smell of old paper and leather binding filling the air. It was a place where I could lose myself in books, in stories that made sense, stories that didn't come with evil whispers and cursed artifacts. I pushed through the heavy doors, the bell above them jingling softly. The library was quiet, too quiet. But there was something comforting about the familiar scent of musty pages, the cool air, the silence that wasn't oppressive, but inviting. I made my way toward the back of the building, where the history section was located. I needed to learn more about the funeral home, about its past, about the ritual I had uncovered. As I passed through the aisles, I noticed something strange. There were no other patrons. The library felt deserted, but not in the usual, peaceful way. This was different. The absence of life felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. I pushed the thought aside and continued my search, skimming the titles of books on local history and folklore. There had to be something here, some piece of the puzzle I was missing. I reached the farthest corner of the history section and pulled a thick, leather-bound volume from the shelf. The title read, "The History of the Willows, The Dark Secrets Beneath the Surface." The book felt cold in my hands, and as I flipped through the pages, my eyes landed on a chapter entitled, "The Lost Rituals of the Old Willows Cemetery." A chill ran down my spine as I began to read. The chapter described ancient ceremonies that had once taken place in the area surrounding the funeral home, rituals dating back centuries, performed by secretive cults that had worshipped dark forces. They had used the funeral home as a focal point, a place where the veil between life and death was thin, a place where they could summon and control dark entities. The cults had vanished long ago, but the book made it clear that their rituals had never truly ended. Their influence still lingered, buried beneath layers of time, waiting to be unearthed. I flipped through the pages faster, my heart racing. One section stood out. It was a passage about the altar beneath the funeral home, a place where the final ritual, the binding, was meant to be completed. The ritual was designed to trap the entity that had been summoned, to imprison it in the stone, to bind it for eternity. But there was a warning. The ritual could only be completed if the entity was fully bound before the altar was destroyed. If the ritual was interrupted, or the altar destroyed before the binding was complete, the entity would be freed. Free to roam the world, free to reclaim its power and spread its influence far beyond the reach of those who had summoned it. I froze, my blood running cold. The altar had been destroyed. The entity had been freed. It was all my fault. A voice broke through the silence of the library, startling me. I turned to see a figure standing in the aisle, watching me with a knowing look in their eyes. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized them. It was Father Lyle. His face was pale, drawn with age, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp. I hadn't seen him since the night I had stumbled into his church all those weeks ago, looking for answers. Now, he stood in front of me, a dark expression on his face, his hands folded in front of him like a priest about to deliver a sermon. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, his voice laced with sorrow. I swallowed hard. "You knew. You knew what I was doing." He nodded. "I knew what would happen if you destroyed the altar. The entity you unleashed cannot be stopped with simple actions. You've awakened it, but you cannot undo what has been done, not without paying a price." I took a step back, shaking my head. "What are you talking about? I thought I could stop it. I thought." "You cannot. It is not a thing that can be banished with rituals or prayers. It is a force, an ancient presence that has been waiting to return. The ritual you interrupted was only one part of its binding, a temporary measure that kept it confined. By destroying the altar, you've freed it, and now it will do everything in its power to reclaim its strength. Then what do I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How do I stop it?" Father Lyle's gaze softened, but there was no hope in his eyes. "There is only one way. You must find the source, the heart of its power. But be warned, it will not be easy. The entity knows you are coming. It will try to stop you at every turn." I felt the shard burning in my pocket again, its presence growing stronger by the second. The dark entity had already begun to find its way back into the world. And I was the one who had set it free. The weight of that knowledge crushed me. There was no going back, only forward, into the darkness. I couldn't shake Father Lyle's words from my mind. You must find the source, the heart of its power. But where? Where could I possibly begin to look for something so ancient, so dangerous? I had already made the mistake of thinking I could destroy it. But now, I had to undo what I had set in motion. And that meant facing whatever horrors lay ahead. The library, which had once been a place of safety, now felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, and the very air felt thick with dread. My fingers trembled as I closed the book, the weight of the knowledge pressing on me like a physical burden. As I turned to leave, my gaze drifted to the other side of the room. In the far corner, a strange book caught my eye, a smaller, older tome that seemed out of place amid the dust-covered volumes. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age, but something about it pulled at me. I couldn't help myself. I walked over and pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than I expected, and when I opened the first page, my breath hitched. The writing inside was not in English, but in symbols I didn't recognize. There were drawings, too, strange, unsettling images of what appeared to be human figures surrounded by swirling, shadowy shapes. It was a language that felt ancient, and the more I looked, the more familiar it seemed, as though it had been burned into my subconscious. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but I knew the book was important. Somehow, it felt like a key to everything that was happening. I didn't have time to translate it. The pulsing shard in my pocket was growing stronger, the hum inside it almost vibrating against my skin. The entity was drawing closer. It was as if it could sense my every movement, my every thought. I couldn't stay in the library any longer. I had to move, had to find the heart of the power before it was too late. I rushed out of the library, the book still clutched in my hands. The city outside had changed. The streets were no longer quiet, but not in the usual way. The air felt oppressive, thick with a sense of unease that seemed to seep from every crack and crevice. The shadows were deeper, longer, and as I walked, I could feel them stretching, following me, whispering things I couldn't understand. Every corner I turned, every street I passed, felt wrong. It was as if the city itself was turning against me, becoming part of the malevolent force I had unleashed. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop, because deep down, I knew that if I did, if I paused for even a moment, the darkness would catch up with me. It had already begun to, in subtle ways, small things that gnawed at my sanity. The flicker of streetlights, the cold wind that swept through me even on the hottest days, the strange feeling of being watched. But what had happened to me? To the world around me? The reality I knew, the life I had lived, was slipping away, replaced by something far darker, far older. I could feel it creeping in, suffocating me, taking hold. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace, the book still clutched tightly in my hands. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every step I took, every movement I made, seemed to be mirrored by the shadows. The dark corners seemed to stretch, twist, and curl, as if they were alive, shifting in time with my own heartbeat. Suddenly, a figure appeared before me, and I nearly stumbled backward in surprise. It was a man, but not just any man. His face was pale, almost sickly white, his eyes sunken and dark, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. His hair was long, matted and unkempt, and he was wearing a tattered coat, its edges frayed with age and wear. His presence felt off. His form seemed to flicker in and out of focus, as if he were not fully in the world, but rather lingering on the edges of reality. He spoke, his voice a rasping whisper. "You've done it now. You've set it free." I froze, unable to speak. His voice was so familiar, though I couldn't place it. His words, though haunting, held a strange weight, as though he knew something about me I didn't. I felt a chill rise from the pit of my stomach, creeping up through my chest, making its way to my throat. I tried to speak, but my words caught in my throat. The man stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "It's coming for you. For all of us. Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something, another shard. This one was larger, more jagged, and the air around it crackled with a strange energy. "You should never have touched it," he said quietly, almost to himself, as if lost in thought. "You don't understand what you've unleashed. But now, you have no choice but to follow the path. You are bound to it. All of us are." I recoiled from the shard, instinctively stepping backward, but he caught my arm, his grip impossibly strong. "You think you can run from it. You think you can escape." His voice dropped to a low growl. "It knows you. It has always known you." I pulled away from him, my mind racing, trying to make sense of his words. I don't understand. What do you mean?" But before he could respond, the sound of something heavy crashing against the ground echoed through the alleyway. We both turned, and I saw a figure standing in the distance. Tall, shadowed, its form obscured by darkness. It was no longer human. The outline was wrong, its limbs twisted and unnaturally long, its body hunched like some grotesque creature. The shard in my pocket pulsed, its hum now loud and clear, vibrating through me like an electric current. The entity was near. The man beside me gave a sickening smile, his teeth sharp and yellow. "There it is. The reason we cannot escape." I turned and ran, my heart hammering in my chest as I bolted down the street, but I could hear it, the thing, the entity, following me, its footsteps heavy and uneven. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't afford to. I ran faster, my lungs burning, my legs aching. But it was getting closer. That unmistakable presence, the oppressive weight of it pressing down on me. It was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was real, and it was coming for me. And as I ran, the chilling truth settled in. There was no escaping it. The endgame had already begun. I couldn't stop running. My mind, gripped by fear, had no room for rational thought. The street ahead seemed to stretch into an endless void, a blackened tunnel that swallowed everything in its path. Behind me, I could hear it. The entity, its heavy steps growing louder, closer, filling the air with an unearthly noise that clawed at my sanity. I was sure I could hear its breath, ragged and unnatural, each inhale a slow, deliberate drag, followed by the chilling exhale that seemed to stretch forever, as if it were savoring the terror that filled me. The streetlights above flickered erratically, casting long, grotesque shadows on the pavement. The faces in those shadows, they weren't human anymore. They were distorted, misshapen reflections of the things that used to be. I could feel it gaining on me, the presence in the air pressing against me like a suffocating weight. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, every instinct telling me to turn, to fight, to confront it, but my body refused to listen. My legs moved faster, desperately trying to outrun the inevitable. I rounded a corner, my foot catching on a loose piece of asphalt, and I stumbled forward, my hands hitting the rough ground. The pain was sharp, but it barely registered as I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was then that I heard something worse than the footsteps. A voice. It wasn't the man from earlier. This was a different voice, low, guttural, and filled with malice. A voice that seemed to reverberate inside my skull. You can't escape. Not anymore. Not after what you've done. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, and for a moment I froze. I couldn't even blink. The terror gripped me, paralyzing my mind. You belong to it now. You always have. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my brain, but the words echoed in my thoughts, each one a dagger sinking deeper. What had I done? What had I unleashed upon the world? My hands trembled as I clutched the shard in my pocket, the pulse inside it thrumming against my skin like a heartbeat, louder with each passing second. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of me, emerging from the shadowed alleyway. It was tall, too tall, its limbs too long and too thin, like some creature stretched beyond natural proportions. The skin was pale, waxy, almost translucent, and its eyes were wide, too wide, and black, as if there was nothing behind them but a void. I gasped, backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls around me were closing in, and the street had become a labyrinth. The very air seemed to change, thickening, becoming almost viscous, as though the world itself was warping, bending, folding under the weight of whatever dark power I had awakened. And then, its lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't human. It was something far older, something that reverberated deep in my chest, like a whisper from the depths of a nightmare. You cannot escape what you have become. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to fight this thing. How could I? I hadn't even understood it until now. But it was too late for understanding. With a scream, I lunged forward, my hands reaching for the shard in my pocket. But before I could even pull it out, the figure vanished in a blur of shadows, and the oppressive feeling in the air grew heavier. It was everywhere now. The darkness, the cold, the weight. The world itself seemed to be slowly unraveling. I ran again, turning another corner, desperate to escape, to find something, anything, that could help me. The only sounds I could hear now were my own footsteps, and even those felt distant, muffled as if they were coming from a faraway place. The oppressive pressure in the air seemed to drown out all other noises. But then, I heard it. A soft voice, a whisper, so faint at first that I thought I might be imagining it. But as I pressed on, the voice became clearer, and it was a voice I recognized. Help me. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was my sister's voice. Help me. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. Help me. Her voice was coming from behind me, and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. but there was no one there. The alleyway was empty, just shadows and the faint, flickering light of the street lamps. The voice came again, louder this time, desperate, pleading. "Help me." I stepped forward, my mind reeling. My thoughts a swirling mess of confusion. What was happening? Was this real? Could it really be her? But as I moved closer, something shifted. The shadows seemed to writhe, twisting and contorting into shapes that were not quite human. I felt a coldness creep up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "No," I whispered to myself, backing away slowly. "This isn't her." But the voice kept calling, growing louder, more insistent. "Please, help me." My heart ached, but something deep within me knew the truth. This was another trick, another lure. The entity, the thing that had followed me all this way, was trying to drag me in, trying to consume me. I couldn't afford to be weak. I had to keep moving, had to find the source, had to end this nightmare before it swallowed everything. I spun on my heels and ran again, ignoring the voice, the pull of my sister's cry. I focused only on the path ahead, determined to find the answers, to find the heart of the darkness that was consuming my world. But the voice didn't stop. It followed me, echoing through the alleyways, bouncing off the walls, filling my ears with the sound of despair. "Help me." I reached the edge of the city, where the buildings faded and the darkness stretched out into an open field. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of the funeral home, the source. The place where everything had begun. My pulse quickened as I made my way toward it. This was the final destination, the place where I would face whatever waited for me. The air grew colder as I approached, the hum of the shard inside me now vibrating fiercely, as if it were alive, thrumming with an energy I could barely comprehend. As I stepped closer, a sense of dread washed over me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop now. Not when the end was in sight. But as I reached the front door, I stopped. The door was ajar, just a crack, and through it, I could see the faintest flicker of movement. Someone, or something, was waiting for me. I had no choice but to go in. The door creaked open with a low groan as I pushed it. Stepping into the dimly lit interior of the funeral home, the air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of decay. The walls, once pristinely white, now bore the marks of time and neglect, their surfaces cracked and stained with dark streaks that seemed to stretch like veins across the walls. It was colder inside than it had been outside, the temperature dropping with each step I took. My breath came out in a visible cloud, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me as if it could offer some protection from the creeping chill. The floor beneath me groaned as I moved forward, the old wood beneath my feet creaking in protest. It seemed to echo, bouncing off the high ceilings and the long, narrow hallways, amplifying the silence that stretched out like an endless void. The funeral home felt wrong, as if the very foundation of the place had been built on something far darker than death itself. I paused, straining my ears. There were no voices now, no whispers. The only sound was the faint thrum of the shard in my pocket, its presence more intense now than ever before. It was as if it were calling to me, beckoning me deeper into the heart of the building. But I wasn't sure if it was the shard itself or something else, something far more sinister, that was drawing me in. I forced myself to move forward. The hallway seemed endless, stretching far beyond the walls. Every step felt like it took me further into a place I couldn't understand, where the rules of the world no longer applied. The walls, once white and clean, were now covered in mold and soot, their once straight lines now warped and distorted, as though the house itself was trying to fold in on itself. There were no windows in sight, and the only light came from the flickering bulbs above me, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the corner of my vision. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, torn papers, and what looked like old funeral wreaths that had long since lost their color. The sense of abandonment was overwhelming. It felt as though this place hadn't seen life in decades. But as I moved further into the building, I began to hear something. A faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. It was low, like the sound of an old furnace struggling to ignite, and it vibrated in my chest, making the air around me seem thick and oppressive. I turned a corner and found myself standing before a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway. It was massive, carved from dark wood that seemed to shimmer faintly in the low light. Symbols were etched into its surface, symbols I didn't recognize, but that felt deeply unsettling. They pulsed, as though alive, as if the door itself were some sort of living entity. I felt the pull again, stronger now. The shard in my pocket vibrated violently, its energy surging through me, urging me to open the door. But something held me back. A voice, a whisper, soft as a breeze, rose from the shadows. "Don't open it." I froze, the blood draining from my face. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a voice that sounded ancient, filled with centuries of sorrow and regret. "Don't go in." The voice repeated, growing more insistent. "You have no idea what lies behind that door." I swallowed, my throat dry, heart pounding in my chest. There was a part of me that wanted to listen, wanted to turn back and run, but the pull of the shard was overwhelming. It was as if it had become a part of me, and I could feel its call deep within my bones. My hand shook as I reached out for the door, my fingers brushing against the cold wood. The moment I touched it, the hum from the walls grew louder, and the door seemed to respond, vibrating beneath my fingertips. And then it opened. The door swung inward with a soft groan, revealing a room that could have been pulled straight from a nightmare. The walls were lined with what appeared to be dozens of stone coffins, their surfaces cracked and worn with age. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the room pressing down on me. In the center of the room, there was a large stone pedestal, and atop it lay a figure, a shape covered in a tattered, moth-eaten shroud. The figure was humanoid, but its proportions were wrong, twisted. It lay perfectly still, as though waiting for something, or someone. I felt a cold hand grip my heart, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This place, it wasn't just a funeral home. It was something more. Something ancient. Something alive. And then I saw it. A pair of eyes opened in the shroud, two glowing, red orbs that stared directly at me, piercing through the darkness. The air around me seemed to freeze, the temperature plummeting even further as the thing on the pedestal began to stir. A low growl emanated from the figure, a sound that reverberated through the room, shaking the very foundations of the building. The figure lifted its head, and I could see that its face was nothing more than a mass of shifting, rotting flesh, as though its features were constantly changing, blurring, melting, reshaping into something unrecognizable. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure on the pedestal began to rise, its limbs stretching unnaturally, creaking like old wood as it moved. It was impossibly tall, towering over me, its body contorting in ways that defied the laws of nature. "You've come too far," the voice whispered again, now filling the room, surrounding me, closing in. "You cannot escape it." The figure's hands, no longer hands, but long, clawed appendages, reached toward me. Its eyes never left mine, and I could feel its presence invading my mind, pushing against the walls of my consciousness, trying to drag me down into some abyss. I couldn't move. The fear, the sheer terror, paralyzed me. But then, the shard in my pocket pulsed violently. I felt its power surge, its energy building, and suddenly, I was able to move again. My fingers closed around it, and for a brief moment, I could feel its power thrumming through me, filling me with a strange, dark strength. The creature hissed, recoiling as if it had been burned, its form shuddering violently. The walls trembled, and the room seemed to warp, the coffins rattling in their stone beds as if they were about to collapse. And then, with a deafening roar, the creature lunged at me. I didn't hesitate. With every ounce of strength I had left, I raised the shard and thrust it forward. The moment it made contact with the creature, the air exploded with a force that sent me sprawling backward, my body slamming into the cold stone floor. I could hear the creature scream, a sound so shrill and agonizing that it rattled my bones. The world around me seemed to shudder, the very fabric of reality tearing apart. The walls began to crumble, the floor beneath me splitting open, as though the building itself was coming undone. I scrambled to my feet, but the shard pulsed again, its energy now spiraling out of control. I looked down, and for the first time, I realized that it wasn't just glowing, it was burning. The room was collapsing. Everything was collapsing, and there was nothing left to hold on to. The world around me fractured into jagged pieces, as if reality itself had been shattered by the shard's immense power. The walls crumbled like dust, the ceiling groaned, and the floor beneath me split open, swallowing everything in its path. I felt weightless, as though I was caught in some terrible limbo, a place between time and space, where the laws of nature no longer applied. The creature, whatever it had been, screeched, a sound so agonizing that it clawed at my sanity. I could feel the very air itself growing heavy, suffocating me, pressing down on me from all sides. The shard was thrumming wildly now, its pulse no longer gentle but a violent, erratic beat that echoed in my chest, in my skull. It was as if it had become alive, feeding on the chaos, feeding on me. I struggled to stay upright as the ground buckled beneath my feet, my legs trembling with the effort. The shadows around me twisted and writhed, becoming things that weren't quite real, figures that shifted in and out of existence, reaching for me, their hands clawing at the edges of my vision. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't move. The fear had consumed me, and I felt as though I was drowning in it. The creature's scream rose again, louder this time, and with it came the sense of something ancient, something infinitely old, pushing its way through the wreckage of the building. I could feel its presence, a dark weight pressing down on my mind, suffocating my thoughts, pulling at the very threads of my soul. Then, a flash of light, brilliant and blinding, pierced through the darkness. The shard in my hand flared with an intensity that made my vision blur. It was as if the very air around me had ignited, the light flooding every corner of the collapsing room, filling it with an unnatural brilliance. The creature recoiled, its form twisting and contorting in agony. Its screams grew sharper, more frantic, as if it were being torn apart from the inside. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I had to survive. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The ground beneath me cracked wide open, revealing a vast, yawning abyss, an endless void that seemed to stretch far below, deep into the earth. I could hear the rushing sound of wind from the depths, the howling of something ancient and hungry, waiting to consume everything in its path. I was running now, my legs moving on instinct, my body propelled forward by nothing more than sheer will. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from the creature, away from the shard, away from whatever nightmare this place had become. Behind me, the building groaned, the walls buckling, the ceiling collapsing in on itself. The flickering lights above me sputtered and died, leaving only darkness in their wake. I could hear the creature's growls, growing louder with each passing second, the sound of its twisted form slithering through the wreckage. It was chasing me. I could feel it, its hunger, its rage, closing in on me. Then, I hit a wall, a dead end. I spun around, heart racing, my breath shallow. There was nowhere to go. The creature was too close. I could hear its claws scraping against the stone, its growls reverberating through the floor. I was trapped, and then the shard pulsed again. This time, it wasn't a violent surge. It was a deep, resonating hum, as though it had found its place within the chaos. I could feel the energy building again, but it wasn't chaotic now. It was focused. Calm. Controlled. I lifted the shard, feeling the pull once more, but this time it was different. The fear that had consumed me moments ago began to fade, replaced by something else. Something that felt almost like acceptance. A voice whispered in my ear, soft and cold. "You have come far. Now, let it end." I closed my eyes, feeling the shard's power coursing through me. The creature's growl echoed louder in my mind, a storm of rage and hunger. It was closing in, its presence suffocating. But I knew what I had to do. I raised the shard higher, its light blinding, its pulse steady. And then, with a force that shook the very ground beneath me, I drove it forward. The creature's scream was cut short, its form shattering, breaking apart like glass under the weight of the shard's power. Its body disintegrated, crumbling into dust, as the room seemed to collapse around me. The darkness that had consumed everything began to recede, the light of the shard pushing it back, piece by piece. And then, silence. I opened my eyes, blinking in the sudden stillness. The world around me was gone. No collapsing building, no twisting shadows, no creature hunting me. Everything was still. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I was standing in the middle of an empty space, the remnants of the funeral home gone. There was no sign of the creature, no trace of the chaos. Just a vast emptiness that stretched on in every direction. But the shard in my hand was still glowing, its pulse now calm, almost peaceful. For a moment, I felt as though I had been released from something, freed from the darkness that had plagued me. But I also knew that it wasn't over. The shard still held power, dark power, and it had taken everything from me to contain it. I looked around, but there was nothing. No way back, no way forward. Just an endless void. I took a deep breath, clutching the shard tightly in my hand. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. There would be no escaping this.